If I remember correctly, Shadow ran off when I was 7. The story I always heard about how he came into our lives was that my dad brought him home from a co-worker who had tried to train him up as a hunting dog. Apparently, Shadow didn't display the correct instincts. It makes sense, he was a husky/labrador mix, so he leaned a little bit into the willful side of his lineage. Everyone else remembers Shadow as a prototypical family dog, loyal, loving, protective, but I have different memories. Even though Shadow was a family dog, it was pretty clear from early on that he was most strongly connected to me. The thing is, I was always afraid of him. He'd follow me all around the house, nudging me this way and that if I wasn't doing what he wanted. I didn't want to be alone in my room with him, but he always managed to corner me in there and wouldn't leave when I told him to. More than once I'd do something bad, and I swear it was because he told me to do it. I had always chalked it up to my childhood imagination, but I remember specifically once when I was maybe 5 years old and my sister was standing at the top of the stairs. He told me to push her down. "No, I won't," I said. My sister, who was a few years older, said, "Won't what?" Then Shadow stared at me and I heard his gruff voice speaking.
"If you don't push her down the stairs, I'm going to go into her room tonight while she's sleeping, and I'm going to rip out her throat."
My sister didn't get seriously hurt, but she did take on quite a few bruises, and I think that's when our relationship started to deteriorate. It has never really recovered. I got in a lot of trouble, rightfully though, and my parents kept a better watch over me for quite a while. Of course, they didn't believe me when I told them Shadow made me do it. Who would?
"You're going to bang your head against the shelf until your parents come to check on you,"
the dog told me. I don't want to.
"I can hear them downstairs right now. I can smell their blood. Do you know how easy it would be for me to kill them? Maybe I'll kill your mom first. Everyone will think you did it, since they all think you're a little serial killer already. Then, after someone takes you away, I will kill your father."
I nearly knocked myself out, banging my head against the cabinet. Shadow liked to come with us on errands. Everyone that saw him said he was the most beautiful dog. Majestic, they said. Gorgeous dog, that one. Or, where did you get him? I'd love to have a dog like that. And to be fair, he was always the perfect dog for everyone else. Calm, well-mannered, came when called. We would be at the ice cream shop and all the teens working there would crowd around him to give him pets and a complimentary ball of whipped cream. When they praised him, he'd look over at me with his beautiful, dichromatic eyes, one blue, one brown, as if to say,
"See, nobody will ever believe you."
Nobody believed me about anything. I guess when I was young, I would tell really fanciful stories about when I used to be an adult. I had this whole life built up with a whole other family and career in the post office, and once I told my parents about it enough, I think they decided that I was simply one of those kids who couldn't tell reality from imagination. They got mad at me with how long it went on. My mom told me once, specifically, I'd awakened her sobbing, saying, "The bad man, he killed me. He broke in the house and killed me with a gun." Apparently, she had to be up early for work that morning, so she was especially angry. "It's just a dream, silly bug," she said, practically dragging me back to my room. I was a little older when I started hearing the babies crying outside. Not every night, but maybe once every couple weeks. I'd awaken in the middle of the night, afraid. Then I'd hear it, a baby crying outside. My mom threatened to lock me in the room at night if I didn't stop waking her up every time that I had a nightmare. And where had that dog gone? She thought if he was in my room, I'd feel protected and wouldn't have to wake her up every time I had a nightmare. I was at brunch with my mom recently when the topic came up about how I was always so imaginative as a child, and she filled me in on some information I wasn't aware of. when I was being awakened by those crying babies, there had actually been a string of child abductions in our city which have gone unsolved to this day. Apparently, it drove a bit of a satanic panic into our community, which escalated until a mob from a church tried to burn down the house of a comic shop owner who sold Dungeons and Dragons materials. My mom always thought that I'd heard some snippets of the news and decided to make up a story about it. That's also part of why they were so thankful for Shadow's connection to me. They knew as long as he was by my side, nothing bad could happen to me. Then, one day, it just disappears. I was about 7 years old and hadn't heard him speak for months, and he seemed less and less interested in me. My mom drove around, searching every night for weeks. We put up flyers and posts and fences, called the pound repeatedly, and did everything we could to find him. But he was just gone. My family thought someone probably grabbed him from our yard, since he was such a gorgeous dog. From then on, I had a more or less normal childhood. I'd forgotten all about him, until he showed up inside my house today. I was walking upstairs to check on my son who was napping in his crib, and there he was in the room, gazing at my child. Every hair on my body stood on end. It's definitely him. I even found an old family photograph and compared it to him. But how can a dog be nearly 40 years old? And how did he find me after all these years? My wife thinks that I'm overreacting. It's just some dog that happens to look exactly like him. But the way he was looking at my son, that everyone always thought was protective, it's the exact same way he used to look at me. I think there is something evil in that dog, and I don't want my son raised with an animal like that. Part 2. My mother thinks it's a miracle. Yesterday, my childhood dog showed up at my house after having disappeared 30 years ago, and I've been trying to figure out what is happening and what it means. To say I'm unsettled would be an understatement. I'm not on the best terms with my mother. We never had the best relationship, but she's pushing boundaries really terribly ever since my son was born. She will show up out of the blue, demanding to spend time with him, demanding grandmother privileges, without giving us any heads up or letting us prepare ourselves for company. She will also take things from the house without asking. She tried to bully us into letting her move in, that sort of thing. It doesn't bug me terribly, maybe because I'm used to it, but my wife has been on the verge of blowing up and banning her from the house for months. So when I first called her up to tell her about this dog that I could swear was Shadow, I should have braced for the worst. She practically broke down the door, rushing over to our house in a matter of minutes. I couldn't think of any distinguishing characteristics other than his thick romantic eyes and the fact that I'd never seen a dog that looked quite like him. But my mother remembered that Shadow had a missing toe in his left front paw, and we were always curious as what had happened. Sure enough, this returned Shadow was also missing the same toe. On that note, my mother has never been the least bit religious, but I think Shadow turning up after all these years is triggering some sort of conversion. It must be a sign. God wants us to have another shot with him, she said. You're religious now? I asked. This is proof of something, isn't it? Your childhood dog, your best friend, has returned after 30 years to protect your son. That's incredible. For once, she and my wife finally agreed on something. We're keeping Shadow. I'm leery as hell about it. And what scares me more than anything is just how comfortable he's making everyone else around him. Last night, my wife and mother were watching television and eating popcorn with Shadow curled up at their feet. I swear, I haven't seen them more at peace together than in that moment. And even I have to admit, it makes me feel bad that I'm trying to deprive them of that. But there is something unnatural about this whole ordeal. Something really, really bad. It's like nobody is listening to reason. Those hairs on the back of your neck that stand up from some deep signal in the mammalian brain that tell you something is very, very wrong. Get out of this situation now. Alarm bells are going off. It feels like I'm the only one who has them in this family. Apparently, he showed up at our door while I was at work yesterday and my wife brought him in to get him a snack and some water. She's a dog person, so seeing the majestic animal panting at our doorstep, she naturally trusted him and let him in. Wait a second, you wanna tell me you brought in a wild animal with our infant son in the house? I asked, honestly flabbergasted. He's not some wild wolf or anything. He's a dog, and obviously a very good one at that. I just could tell. I remembered back to my childhood that gruff voice that came from Shadow, detailing each gory moment of the scene that would happen if he chose to rip out my sister's throat. The flesh torn open, the blood drenching the cartoon pillowcase, the splatter on her curtains as he shook her windpipe like a dead rat. I looked at him, and the way he looked at me was as if he knew. Every moment he's in this house, I'm going to be afraid of what he will do, I told her. He's a good dog. Your mom said you were inseparable from him when you were a kid. What's changed? Why is nobody listening to me? He was possessive of me, but I was always terrified of him. I don't want him in our house, I said. You're being so irrational about this, she said. Irrational? I'm sorry. I'm not convinced a dog can be 37 years old. My brain's not some cabinet of horrors. I get that I have the reputation in my family as still being some sort of imaginative child, even though all that stopped 30 years ago. But it feels to me that these red flags I'm seeing everywhere are pretty obvious. Honestly, the worst thing is that after never being civil to each other for 6.5 years, my wife and mother are abruptly best friends. My wife even invited my mother to come stay with us for a while. My wife and I were in the kitchen after dinner when she brought the idea up. I had been drying a plate and it slipped out of my hands and broke on the floor. An extra pair of hands around the house won't hurt. An extra pair of hands and a drooling maw, I said. The dog looked up at me and I felt like it grabbed my voice. I cleaned up the broken plate, downcast. The moment she brought it up, I knew I'd already lost that argument. I've been burning through overtime at work to pay for childcare, but that's left so much extra housework for my wife that it's really not fair to her from me to argue on this. We need the help. So in addition to worrying about this demon dog or whatever Shadow is, I'm having to move everything out of my office to make my mother a guest room, and the emotional dynamic of my marriage has completely shifted overnight. Most of the things in my office I didn't really use. I carried the files downstairs and had started the laborious project of trying to disassemble my wire shelves when I heard my son babbling in the other room. He was never this talkative. I came into my son's room as the sun was dipping below the window and bathing the room in a golden light. Shadow was there, but this time he was standing on his hind legs, almost as if he was human. His hair puffed up and he looked powerful, fragile, wise. He stood there, gazing at my son. "No," I said. "Go back to where you came from. I don't want you here." When he turned to look at me, his eyes burned into mine with an intense stare. They reached into me and grabbed hold of something they found inside me. I couldn't move. An unbelievable feeling of calm washed over me and I left the room as though my body was on marionette strings. As soon as I closed the door, my parental instincts took back over and I was immediately terrified that something was happening to my son. I yanked the door back open, dreading the worst. What if the beast had carried him off, had taken him to some dark hole where we would never find him to eat his tender body? What if he'd come back again from some rotten hell to take everything from me and there was nothing I could do to stop him? But when the door flew open, Shadow was sitting there as a regular dog, wagging his tail while my son said nonsense syllables to him. But that wasn't real. something was off. It was like the scene was only my imagination. My eyes, they weren't even open. How could what I was seeing be real if my eyes weren't even open? I focused with everything I had. My body felt like it was moving through wet concrete. If I didn't shock it off right now, it would solidify and I wouldn't be able to regain control again. I focused even as something pushed back. I pushed with all my will to open my eyes and see what was actually happening in front of me. I dredged up every ounce of courage I had against the beast, every ounce of resentment for the things he did to me in my childhood. I remembered how he made me, an innocent little boy, push my sister down the stairs, how I'd never recovered my relationship with her. No, I thought, I'm an adult now, not some little boy who is constantly afraid. I will see, I will, I told myself. My eyes snapped open. I saw a shadow standing upright, bipedal, his back long, straight and strong, and he was holding my son. The back of his onesie caught on the animal's teether. He looked at me with golden eyes, stared into me, but I refused to budge. I refused to let him back into me even an inch. I realized he was frozen as well. For some reason, he couldn't move while he was trying to exert his will over me. My son wriggled and I knew he was destined to fall at any moment. I pushed through the room, every step heavy and exhausting. I grabbed my son out of Shadow's mouth and wrenched him free, and I backed out of the room. As soon as I was free of the room, I regained full control of my body and dashed down the stairs, holding my infant son. I was going to get us out of this, no matter what my wife and mother thought. I heard my wife's voice call out to me from the kitchen as I was already nearly out the door. You cannot leave with him. He is not your son anymore. Shadow will be a better father to him than you ever could be. Shadow can keep him safe. It was my wife's voice, but those weren't her words. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what, but even if she was deranged enough to claim Shadow was my son's father, she wouldn't have used those words. He's done something to you. You have to resist. You have to break free. My mother came out of the kitchen carrying a pair of scissors as if they were knives, smiling. I'm sorry, I muttered. I'm sorry I'm leaving you to him, but I have to make sure our son is safe. I'll be back for you, I promise. I slammed the door and leapt in my car. In my bedroom window, I saw Shadow watching me. I didn't even want to know what his next move would be. I drove until I was tired of driving and pulled into a parking lot to think and type this up. My son is sleeping in the car seat. For the moment, we're safe. But where can we go from here? I have no idea. Part 3. Last night I fled my house where my wife and mother had been possessed by some evil thing taking the shape of my childhood dog, Shadow. After driving, stricken by terror, aimless and without hope, I reached out to my sister, Ellie. We'd never really been close, but I knew she'd gone no contact with the rest of the family years ago. So if I had any safe haven, it was going to have to be her. I was wondering if I'd hear from you. Mom's been blowing up my phone, left me at least a dozen messages in a couple of hours, and she knows I'm not about to listen to them. Honestly, I wasn't sure where to start. You know that dog we had, Shadow, who disappeared 30 years ago? He showed back up at my house. What dog? We never had a dog, she said. I described Shadow to her, told her about how he used to go everywhere with us, showed her pictures on my phone. Nothing jogged her memory. She literally had no memory whatsoever of us ever having a dog, nor of my mom pinning after our lost pet for years afterwards. I worried, was this Shadow's fault too? I'd already witnessed firsthand his ability to reach into my mind. Would it be too much to assume he could erase someone's memory of him entirely? You have to be kidding. Why don't I remember him? She asked. I recounted what had happened in 2 days since Shadow had showed up, how strange my wife and mother had been acting, Shadow's obsession with my son, my general feeling of the house being unsafe, how our mother chased me out of the house with scissors while I was holding my infant son. I left out the supernatural for now. How could I expect her to believe that? Mom's finally lost it, huh? You know, the thing that really drove us apart was how vicious she could get while mocking my beliefs in the spiritual. Now she goes and turns into a true believer because of this dog? It's hard to wrap my head around. While she listened to my mom's ranting voicemails, I got settled and set up a makeshift travel crib for my son. He slept in the car, but when he woke up, he was obviously cranky about it. She's reeling on something else about this dog, isn't she? She keeps saying you'd better return his son and that you can't get your own. I get why you had to escape. She made me coffee and I braved the walls of text my wife sent. Come back here, honey. There's nothing to be afraid of. I keep telling you, Shadow is a good dog. If you feel like he was hostile to you, he was only trying to protect our son. If you don't come home soon, I'm calling the police. You can't just take our son away from us. Shadow wouldn't like that. He's a good dog. Come back here and he'll forgive you. What is happening? Don't come home. Take our son far away from here. I'm so scared. Please help me. Help me. I can't do this. He's going to kill us. He's going to kill us all. There's a black pit with teeth at its rim and it's swallowing me. It's a black pit with blood dripping down its sides. I'm so scared. I'd rather die than let him get our son. I'm so scared. There's a deep black pit with teeth at its rim and it goes down and it never ends. That's where I'm going. He's not a dog. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Please help. I cannot do this anymore. Come back here, honey. Shadow will forgive you. He's forgiven all of us. Can't you see that's why he's here? He wants to make our lives better. He's going to make sure our son is safe. Nobody will ever hurt him. I had to help her, my wife, trapped in some deep supernatural pit. I couldn't imagine her terror. My face went slack sitting there at my sister's house, reading these messages, my child fussing in the corner. Does mom want to marry that dog or something? Seriously, this is bonkers, my sister said from the kitchen. Hey, you still there? I was too caught in the dread of the wall of text to respond. I felt like my soul had just been sucked out. I couldn't let her stay here. I couldn't let Shadow win this time. Yeah, I'm here. There's more than I told you. And so I told the story of exactly what had happened. How Shadow wasn't a dog, but something else entirely. How he tried to take control of my mind. I showed her the text from my wife. Initially, I was sure she'd think I lost it too. She had to remember that I was the imaginative child. Of course, she'd think that I was making up another story to deal with the trauma of leaving my family, but to her credit, she just nodded, listening. I've heard of things like this happening, but never so serious, she said, the lines in her face deepening. I guess since we've been so distant, I never realized how much she'd grown as a person. How she had her own complete life that had changed her, that carefree, curious and impulsive red-headed older sister of mine had grown up years ago. And I wondered what she saw in me, her petulant younger brother. Did she read the life behind my wrinkles as well? I have some friends who might be able to help, she said, hesitating. Only they're odd, so just be real with them, okay? They might seem a bit eccentric, but they will take this seriously, I promise. Dabbling with the occult takes a certain kind of person is all. That's how I met Hawthorne and Taryn the next day. They came to my sister's house the next morning. Hawthorne was a short, goth-looking guy who wore all sorts of chains with symbols on them, pensive and quiet. He described himself as a warlock of sorts. Taryn was dressed like a construction worker, with Carhartt overalls and a white shirt. Her every gesture emanated a strange intensity that made me think of a drill sergeant. Damn, complicated case, huh? Hawthorne said. mostly to Taryn. Complicated? Nah, we take out the dog and whatever the hell this is will go about its merry way, won't it? She opened and closed her hands, tensing every muscle. I'm not so sure. Hawthorne turned the idea around in his head. If it's a standard demon, maybe an exorcism, but this is some pretty nasty mind control for a demon, and why wouldn't it take a human as a host? Okay, we chop the head off the animal, it goes away? I'm doubtful of that. So far, we've seen evidence for 3 different manifestations of whatever this shadow is, so it's difficult to ascertain which is the truth or what lies behind all of it. 3? I asked. Yes, Hawthorne said. First, Shadow as the dog you'd always known him as. Second is the version of Shadow that you saw standing at your son's grave. Third is the hole with the teeth lining its edges your wife detailed. That last part is a real riddle, because that's what she's saying when she's inside its grasp trying to break free. So what do we do now? I asked. What we can't do is wait. This thing is a malicious entity and it's hungry for something. Showing up after 30 years, now exerting a great deal of more influence, that's a major move. If Shadow can't get your child, he's going to escalate the situation. Tombstone? Taryn asked. I'm afraid so, Hawthorne shrugged. What does that mean? I asked. Like White Herb and his brothers against cowboys, we go in armed to the hip and tell him to throw down his weapons and disband, get out of town, that sort of thing. Taryn almost seemed excited about it. I thought of my wife stuck in some deep pit, screaming for help. I hope this will work. We arrived at my house an hour before sunset. Taryn and Hawthorne had packed a full carload of supplies for the exorcism. Holy water, crosses, Bibles, holy books from other religions, a tub of salt, and a bunch of paraphernalia I couldn't identify. I'd left my son in the care of my sister. If anything happened to me, she said she would keep him safe. The house looked so peaceful. Its blue trim gave way to its white siding. The grass on the lawn only slightly untidy. Until today, I'd never walked in with an ounce of fear. But today, it took an unbelievable effort just to open the car door. And yet, from the outside, nobody could guess that something sinister waited within. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table when we came in. Good, you've brought your friends. Shadow is very social. He'll be pleased for the company, she said. We ignored her and went upstairs to find my wife and Shadow. They were both sitting in my son's room as if they were waiting for us. Shadow wants his son back, honey. Why don't you just bring him to us? My wife said in an eerie, monotone voice. It sent a chill down my spine. That was her mouth. That was her voice box. But it wasn't quite her voice. Shadow didn't move from where he sat, but gazed at Hawthorne and Taryn as if investigating every aspect of their appearance. None of that would help you. But you're free to try. He won't stop you, my wife said, laughing. Hawthorne and Taryn stood there, motionless. Start the exorcism while we have the chance, I said. My wife continued laughing. Oh, I think Shadow might have changed his mind. She turned to me. Now you're going to push me down the stairs as a little punishment. I looked at her in horror. No, not again, I said. Then maybe Shadow will kill your new friends here. How do you think he'll do it? Do you think it will be quick? He could go for their throats. Or maybe he will take his time. There's plenty of little arteries in the arms and legs that he could bite into. I won't do it. We are going to stop you, I said. She walked to the top of the stairs. Come on, it will be fun. You can't tell me everything has always been rosy for us. This is your chance to get back at me. She paused. You're no fun. I guess I'll just throw myself. Who knows? Maybe my neck will snap. Shadow would have fun with that. Dogs like a good bone. I reached out and grabbed her, pulling her right back as she was about to do it. Help, help, he has my mind, and I can't get out. Help me, I can't stand it anymore, she screamed. "We have to go, now," I said. I started pulling her towards the door and her head flew back and she began laughing in a voice that wasn't her own at all.
"It's not going to be that easy. Here's a deal. Bring the child and you can have your wife back. In the meanwhile, I'll save her your friends."
I turned to look at Hawthorne and Taryn. Shadow still had full control over them. What could I do? I couldn't leave them. Just then, the glass jar of holy water in Taryn's hand shattered and she snapped out of the paralysis. "Run!" she yelled, dragging Hawthorne. I tried to grab my wife, but she continued laughing, unmoving, as if her body weighed as much as the whole house. Please, 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 you have to break free from him. For one moment, I can't do this without you," I said. Taryn grabbed my hand and she must have dragged me out, because I wasn't going to abandon my wife to that monster again. Our son would be safe. It was her turn to be saved. I don't remember everything that happened in the next few minutes. It felt like a slab of rock. Somehow, Hawthorne and Taryn got me out of the house and in the car, and we drove back in the directions of my sister's house. What do I do now? Part 4. I am so angry and afraid all the time, and I don't know what to do about it. After what happened with Shadow, I feel like a different person. I've never been quick to anger, always a tranquil little pond of emotions on the inside. But now there's this storming thing inside me. It's a deep pit that goes on and on. A week ago, my childhood dog, Shadow, showed up after 30 years. Only it wasn't a dog really. Within 24 hours, he possessed both my wife and my mother, and I fled with my infant son to my sister's house. A few days later, I brought 2 experts in the paranormal to my house to try to exorcise or otherwise banish Shadow, but we barely made it out of the house. I didn't go back until last night. Hawthorne and Taryn, the paranormal experts, pulled me out of the house and we drove back to my sister Ellie's. It was a long, tense ride. We swerved through fog so thick I could taste it as it threatened to swallow us. I was in despair that we hadn't gotten my wife out, and I think the others were shell-shocked by the horror that they'd experienced when they confronted Shadow. "I've never met such malignant evil," Hawthorne said. "Never. He made us into puppets, playthings. What the hell? Seriously, what the hell was that?" Taryn said, guiding us between the yellow lines of the highway. "I think we can rule out a demon," Hawthorne said. "No sulfur smell, no response to any of the tools we brought, completely able to take our bodies it wasn't inhabiting. I have no idea. He doesn't seem like a ghost or any purely physical being either." We arrived back at Ellie's and debriefed her. My son slept through the meeting, and when I checked on him later, he was still so peacefully asleep. A faint calm of vanilla hung in the room. Whatever I did, I couldn't let Shadow get a hold of him. "I'm not going back in there," Hawthorne said as they left. "I'm sorry to say this situation is way over my head. Wish we could do more to help, but I don't think I'd survive my next encounter with that entity. I gotta agree, as much as I hate to say it, if that glass in my hand didn't shatter, we wouldn't have made it out. I know when I'm beat," Taryn said, examining the cuts on her hand. I thanked them for putting their lives on the line for me and asked them to let me know if their research hit on anything. "There's one thing I noticed," Hawthorne said. "The entity has a more difficult time controlling you than the others. That must have something to do with your connection and why it's targeting you. If there's a way to get through this, I think you are the only one who is going to be able to do it." They disappeared into the night mist with a faint hum of an automotive engine starting and crackling tires leaving the gravel driveway. I spent the next few days getting my affairs in order. Truthfully, I didn't expect to make it out of that house when I went to confront Shadow again. If I didn't come back, Ellie was to take my son and go somewhere that Shadow couldn't find him. That was the main part I had to protect my son. There's an endless pit, rimmed with human teeth. There's a deep, deep pit. Help, I can't stay here. He has me in his body, my soul. He has my body. Someone, please get me out of here. There's a deep pit full of gnashing. There's nothing at the bottom. Get out of the way. Don't let him in. Don't let him have me. Help me. My wife was trapped with him. I needed to get her out, and my mother as well if I could. Yesterday, everything was in order. I crawled into my sedan, forced myself into it. It's hard. I know 37 years is more than some people get, more than most people in their history of human race have gotten, but it seems such a short time to have lived to now be heading for what I assumed would be my death. I forced myself to close the door, turn the ignition on, to put the vehicle in gear. I had no plan other than to go in there and to confront him. My mother was in the kitchen, just sitting there with her eyes wide open, not even blinking. She turned towards me and smiled a despicable, tooth-wide, gaping smile, and cocked her neck painfully to its side. I heard a crack. "Welcome home, dear. We've all been waiting for you. Now, just bring Shadow as child, and we can be a happy family." My lungs felt filled with dread, but I pushed myself onward and up the stairs. There in the room, at the top of the stairs, Shadow sat there with my wife, who stared straight ahead with the same disheartening expression I saw my mother.
No friends now. Did they all abandon you? You are distinctly unlovable, aren't you?
My wife spoke, but the sound was deep and rasping. It wasn't her voice at all. "I don't care what you are. I want you out of this house," I told the dog. He sat there, Rachel. Other people had always commented on how he was the most beautiful dog they'd ever seen, but I tried to see past that image into how I'd seen him the other day, standing over my son.
"Oh, that's not nice. This is my home now. You don't want to kick out an old dog out into the cold streets to whimper and whine in hunger, to shiver in the ditches searching for any scrap of food. You're not that cruel."
Again, it was my wife's body speaking these words. The dog simply sat, staring at me with his dichromatic eyes. "You are not a dog," I said to it.
"I want your love and adoration, your devotion. Is that too much to ask? Maybe I should throw your wife down the stairs. Would you love me then? What if I took away the people in your life one by one until I was all that was left? You'd be forced to love me then, wouldn't you?"
I tried to see him as he truly was, behind the mirage of the beautiful dog I made out an animal in the same shape, but covered in decaying skin. I reached for my wife. "We're going, and I'm taking her somewhere you will never find us," I said. She recoiled from my touch. "Save me!" she screamed, even as her body pulled away.
"That won't do,"
the other voice spoke through her. "What do you want?" I screamed.
"Your son,"
the cruel voice responded. "You're not getting him," I said.
"I'll give you a deal then. You were always a smart child. If I have you, I won't need the infants.
"Don't do it, please, honey. There has to be another way."
I let your wife and your mother go free, and I won't kill any of her little friends. And all you have to do is give yourself over to me willingly."
My wife and mother will be able to go back to their lives? You'll let go of them completely? I knew I was powerless to stop him. This could be the only way of saving them.
"I won't need them if I have you."
And my son?
"He was only a replacement. You were always my favorite. Or don't you remember?"
"I'll do it." I swallowed and felt a lump in my throat. "If you leave the others alone, you can have me." Shadow walked toward me, rising onto its hind legs. As he approached, he no longer looked like a dog, but instead he was a man with a dog's head. His eyes burned, staring into me. He raised up his claw-like hand and put his index finger on the center of my forehead. My head erupted in pain as he pushed a sharp spear through my flesh, then through my skull itself. A wide smile drew across his face. I could feel him inside me. I didn't know how, but I was frozen as he pushed his whole arm into my forehead. I saw beyond the image he had shown me that he had stretched himself into something like a narrow hole cut through the air. And this deep pit entered me, and I felt filled by its hollowness and its gnashing teeth, its endless grinding bones, and its hunger that could never be satisfied, and its hatred of all things living. And then I collapsed on the ground and lost consciousness. "Wake up! Wake up!" My wife was shaking me. What happened? I asked. "I don't know," she said. "It's all over though. I don't know how you did it, but you got him to leave. Shadow is gone." Days passed. Life went back to normal, at least for everyone else it did. But since then, I've been filled with anger every moment of every day, sitting at the bottom of my gut, burning a hole in me. I will hear a glass being set onto the counter. I'll notice a toy left on the ground, and it will take everything I have to stifle an eruption. I might have to leave for their sake. Every time I close my eyes, I see a deep black pit rimmed with broken teeth. I black out and lose time. I wake up sometimes miles from home with red smears all over my hands. I know I should be happy that my family is safe, but something inside me is broken. Shadow won. Whatever he is, he's inside me, and like it or not, he's bending me to his will.